This is the webinar where we have a lovely little pocket where we're going to dive into the question, both a presentation, but also a conversation on what a lead deliberative facilitator must know and be able to do. And we're going to present kind of a product, an outcome of a work we've been on for some time, which is a new, at least our suggestion for a new deliberative facilitator competence model, which is our best shot at what is actually a part of the answer to that question. And it's been co-developed by a range of people, and I'm just going to say who, and then I'm going to get back to what we're going to do. So it's the FIDE Europe team, and you probably know some of them, but they will pop up in this conversation later and will present themselves. And then it's me, I'm the executive director of We Do Democracy, together with my colleague Clara Sørensen, who's also in this room. That's why I'm pointing. She's going to do some presentation later as well. And then we've had amazing team support and participation as well from Jakob Birkenhager and Vibke Blum from Nexus, and Maria Jagacek and Kelly McBride, Pete Bryan, Nicole Hunter, Scott Cabot-Newton, and Ian Walker, not least, in the development work. And thank you for that. And today we're gonna in a second, Eve will share with us, from FIDE will share with us some notes on why this conversation about deliberative facilitation is important. Then Clara and Kyle will present this competence model, and a short introduction to our first drafted masterclass for deliberative facilitators. I will do that presentation. And then we will have a lovely spot for some breakout rooms where you all will have a chance to talk to each other about this model, what resonates with you, what are you missing, what you like, etc. And after that, we have invited some experienced facilitators to help us qualify this conversation. And it's Kelly McBride, it's Susanna Novak, and it's Katrine Skar, and Jakob he's gonna moderate the conversation. So a little deep dive into the need of this conversation. As I said, I'm the executive director of We Do Democracy, and I'm also a democracy advisor and a lead deliberative facilitator. And I hosted and facilitated, designed and facilitated my first mini public 6 years ago. And at that time, I found, luckily, FIDE's masterclass introduction to deliberative democracy, but I didn't find any place where I could get deliberative facilitation training. So we picked what we could find, books and podcasts, and I had Peter McLeod from Canada's hand in my back for phone calls, etc., but I couldn't find any training. So we have been developing our own practice and have been snooping and stealing stuff from other great people and developing our own practice. But I think we have on our own body have experienced the need for a really qualified deliberative facilitation training. And as you all know, because you are probably all in the field for some years, we've had this conversation with a growing amount of people who are aware of and work with deliberative democracy, in the increasing amount of assemblies and mini publics that are assigned and commissioned. It's rather obvious that if we don't have a kind of a number of facilitators who are actually able to run these assemblies and mini publics, then we're going to have a problem with quality at some point, and that's kind of, in a really weird way, going to undermine the field. So we think this is extremely important, and we at We Do Democracy, we have been designing and running plus 30 assemblies on local, national, regional level, and we still think there is a need for this training as well. So I'm very happy to open this conversation to a broader group of people, us today, for qualification and also, of course, the raise of awareness of the need of development in this field and investment in this field. So on that note, I'm happy to invite Eve De Jager into the conversation, who is with us from an airport, and it's first time ever I see you with a tie. If nothing else, that's amazing.
Yeah,
hello, my friend.
Hello. I hope you can hear me. I'm I'm effectively in the airport of Chisinau in Moldova, just out of a meeting. And just saying, I mean, also here, they're planning a national assembly, citizen assembly, with civil society in the lead, but also looking at local citizen assembly. So the why of doing this actually was made, again, very clear by having meetings the last 2 days. Why is FIDE involved in this? And I'm going to keep it short. Some of the arguments have been said by Zakia already. I always say very short that FIDE tries to improve the quality and quantity of citizen assemblies in Europe, and in that order, right? Quality and then quantity. And we've always tried to improve that quality by providing a service, amongst others, through capacity building. And as Zakia said, we've been running these schools where in the beginning, the middle part, the black box, we actually almost skipped over it. We gave a lot of attention to recruitment, how to get political buy-in, etc. And we were almost, then magic happens, and then you have recommendations and how. So our sessions, slowly, we had a facilitation workshop, which was still optional. It wasn't part of the core curriculum. And then we added it. And you can see also how we evolved in seeing the role of facilitation as really being really crucial and central. And so we were answering to a demand. So it became core of what we did, but of course, still within the existing schools. Now, in most cases, what we also see is that, as Zakia said, development was self-taught very often regional, and very often people would do a bit of correct steering by having talks with, for Zakia, it was Peter McLeod. You would, during a democracy R&D meeting, ask somebody, can we talk over coffee? But so this is how actually a lot of facilitation regional models have been developed. And we think we should go from this ad hoc to looking at, okay, how can we find some general competence model that across several traditions and is not kind of one size fits all, but kind of what competences do we kind of agree on? I've, for example, known that during a school in Estonia, somebody asked, I'll give you a car ride through the airport if I can pick your brain for 1 hour and a half. So we have to move from two people sitting in a car. Yes, it was you, Zakia. From sitting in a car, that this is the model of training lead facilitators, to something more structural and thought through. And so this is why we partnered with a lot of great people here in the room to think about how can we get a qualitative take-up of facilitation and a more structural approach to capacity building in this field. So I think the number of people who enrolled for this, we have more than 100 people attending now, but we had more than 200 signing up for this, and people who want to keep informed, clearly shows that there is a demand to have at least a discussion about this. So unfortunately, I will have to be in a plane soon. I cannot stay with you, but I'm looking forward to see the recording, and I have no doubt this is going to be a very fascinating discussion to follow up upon. So enjoy the conversation today, and I'll see you on recording soon. Okay, good luck, bye.
I think that's over to me now. So hi everyone, thanks to Eve, Zakia for the introduction. My name is Kyle, I work at FIDE, I'm the program manager there. I'm going to quickly now give you a bit of a context setting for the competence model, answer some of the questions sort of like, why have we done this, what's it for, who is it trying to describe, and then I'm going to pass it over to Clara Sorensen from We Do Democracy, and she's going to talk through the detailed parts of the competence model. So taking maybe like a step back, with sort of thinking, why a competence model, how have we arrived here? Well, Zakia and Eve have already kind of spoken through the sort of bigger picture, strategic sort of motivations for FIDE and We Do Democracy, which is we want to increase the number of people who are capable of delivering high stakes deliberative processes. So we're thinking sort of, how do we add the last few rungs onto the ladder for people who have maybe like some early experience in deliberative processes, but how can we get them prepared for the most high stakes settings? To do this, we needed to build a training program, and we wanted to put these sort of new and semi-experienced facilitators through the program. But to build a program, we kind of needed to have a clear picture for ourselves of what these people might look like at the end. So we sort of sat down and reflected, what is the skill set that Zakia has, what's the skill set that we have, What are the skills that we see? Excellence demonstrated by facilitators that we sort of admire all around the globe, but also sort of almost looking to push that bar a little higher as well. I think all the facilitators in the world will probably say there's different aspects in which they can improve. And so we're really trying to push all the boundaries of that kind of improvement within this model. And so in that way, the competence model sort of documents what we think are the necessary skills for these sort of lead facilitators that we're describing. And that also is our opportunity to sort of start this conversation of how do we raise the quality bar for facilitators. And I think one other thing to note, I'm going to talk a little bit after Clara has spoken about or walked through the competence model itself on this kind of word lead facilitation, but it sort of relates a little bit here, which is sort of like, who is this describing? And this is a portrait or a profile of maybe not one individual person in your project. You will often see that competencies that are captured or described here will be distributed across the team. That's good and healthy, but we do think that in what we're describing here, the very best facilitators will embody all of these competences. And it's actually important that they are able to make this combination, because some of the factors or the things that let you be adaptive and responsive in the room require a combination of competences, not just narrow skill sets. So I think now, next slide, if we can, Miguel, the last thing here is just the list of sort of domains. The competence model is set up with some foundational principles and then has six sort of domains of different skills and competences that we described. So that is macro process design, micro process design, process facilitation, project leadership in deliberative contexts, knowledge curation, expert input and stakeholders, and communication and presentation of the deliberative process itself. So I'll now hand over to Clara to walk through those in detail.
Thanks. I won't do it in like super detail because you will have a chance to read it, but I'll just walk through each of the 6 domains and kind of give you a preview into what it could contain, what skills are in the domains. But first of all, I think I just want to highlight the fact that we've included these foundations because apart from being able to do something or having a certain skill or knowledge, there's also certain beliefs that we believe that lead facilitators must hold. And I've highlighted this one, that is belief in the capabilities of ordinary people, because I think it's one of the beliefs that we are also kind of continuously fighting against some common stories about democracy being about electing good leaders. And so this is a belief that we not only need lead facilitators to have, but also a belief that we need to kind of continuously uphold and kind of foster within our community. Okay, but diving into kind of the first competence domain, it's the macro process design. It's all of kind of the boundary conditions that makes it possible to actually do facilitation in the room. So it's all of the kind of overall process design, it's the form of the recommendations, it's the time, the number and form of meetings, it's kind of how the governance structures and the public engagement and is set up to also make sure that we have inclusive design. So it's all of the kind of big stuff. If we dive into kind of one of the skills that we've included into this, I've chosen the number 11. It's the ability to be able to design a process that will maximize inclusive design, that is aware and sensitive to context, difficult experiences, and complex emotions. For example, with Indigenous communities, multilingual or multicultural settings, post-conflict settings, deeply divided context, etc. There could be a bunch of things here. And I've chosen this one because I think it actually highlights the need for having this kind of training or this kind of conversation, that I will be able to travel to a completely different context or another country and do a deliberative panel without like really close collaboration with people who know the context, because assemblies don't happen in a vacuum. They happen with real people living real lives in real cultural settings. So we need really trained and skilled facilitators where we want the assemblies to happen. If we move on to then naturally comes the micro process design. And this is what ties kind of the macro stuff together with being able to then step into a room. So it's going from the remit to the line of inquiry and exercise questions you're going to do. It's the program, it's the run sheet, it's all the process methodologies that we then use to get people actually deliberating, actually learning, actually figuring out what their recommendations are. So it's also doing kind of task design and voting processes. Yeah, so two of the skills that we have in this kind of domain is, of course, having a broad repertoire of process methodologies and problem-solving expertise, so that you have kind of the tools that you need to be able to use to do a step-by-step collective decision-making process. And I think this is going to be so interesting to dive into, because I think I'm not even really aware of kind of all the different process tools that are in the toolboxes of my kind of co-facilitators around Europe and around the world. And I think kind of getting a stronger toolbox that we share can also help us figuring out, well, which process tools, there's never one that works and one that doesn't work, but which are maybe a little bit better, and who's kind of cracked the code at something that's difficult. The second one I've chosen is the ability to choose, plan, and handle voting procedures that fit the level of consensus required within the group. And I think being in kind of a democratic conversation, which is closer to consensus than classical voting, we sometimes forget that voting, at least in a lot of the deliberative processes I know of, at some point play a role, and how we design that voting procedure is kind of an age-old democratic question that facilitators also need to be able to do and handle. Okay, let's go into then. This is what everyone will recognize as process facilitation. So it's being able to step into a room, hosting a group, making sure there is deliberation, making sure there is dialogue and cooperation, pushing a group beyond the easy answers, giving instructions, and then, of course, the time management, the documentations, handling group dysfunctions and conflicts. So this is also the domain with the longest list of skills that we've included, naturally, since this is a facilitation competence model. One of them is being actually able to kind of handle communication with these randomly selected assembly members once they commence the process, including onboarding assembly members. And I've chosen this one because I think we sometimes think of facilitation as something that happens once you have the first assembly meeting. But I at least would argue that facilitation actually begins at that very first email, or even the invitation letter, or the first phone call that you have, because this is most likely the first time that this person is ever hearing about a citizen assembly. So kind of facilitating, helping them into that process actually happens already there. And then this 3.3 about being able to push a group beyond an easy answer is, I think, something that sets like the really excellent facilitators apart, because it's easy. I think a lot of facilitators are maybe a little bit people pleasers. We like kind of having the group having a nice time and the process is smooth, but we also need to make sure they're actually handling the things that are difficult. And that is also where we can see that it requires some knowledge about the things that have happened before the remit design, because often the commissioning parties are maybe also commissioning this for the first time. So they might not have chosen the best question, and it might not be like the real problem that they need to solve. And we might just figure this out at the third meeting in the assembly, and we need to be able to kind of handle that. Okay, Kyle, you can move on. So no meetings without a little bit of project leadership. This is everything about like stakeholder management, planning and delivering milestones, being able to know what facilitation costs. So it's not being in charge of the entire deliberative or the entire citizen assembly, but there are things that we need to be able to do. So one of the skills in that particular domain is being able to manage and champion the integrity of a process by building relationships with the client and key stakeholders, fostering their trust and managing them by deploying advice at critical moments to ensure the process remains robust and respected. And for me, at least, as a relatively new facilitator still, this is kind of what makes one of the things that makes citizen assemblies really, really complicated is that you have a lot of stakeholders, you have a commissioning party, but who is the commissioning party? Is it only the politicians? It's probably also the civil servants. So you're managing kind of all of these stakeholders. And when you do that well, that can be like gold for a process. But if you do it poorly, that can also be really toxic for the process. So this is like really key. Okay, almost through. The fifth domain is, of course, the knowledge curation, expert input, and stakeholders. Because this is also one of the things that sets citizen assemblies apart from other kind of facilitated spaces, that you actually need to know how to do a learning process with 30 completely random or 90 or 100 random people who have completely different backgrounds, different levels of learning capabilities, and you need to open the problem space with them and connect actors and engage with questions and critical thinking from all of these perspectives. So one of the skills here I was going to highlight is kind of the idea of being able to also manage the level of the knowledge that you provide to a group. So kind of when is understanding improved enough? And I think that's one of the discussions I'm also looking forward to have with more facilitators, because I'd hear different ideas of what is enough knowledge. Is it 7 experts or 20 experts? To the very last domain, it's the communication and presentation. And it's the reason it's included is because a facilitator, especially in this context, is kind of, I want to call it a multi-communicator. So they are communicating with members, with stakeholders, with the public, with people joining and observing, with experts coming to speak. And you need to be able to communicate in the right way and about the right things for all of these groups while still maintaining transparency and privacy and kind of protecting the member experience. So one central skill here is kind of really being able to translate this kind of quite complex information between these parties and making sure that they know what they need to know when they need to know it. So that was a quick pass on some of the highlights, and you'll have time to debate and kind of question everything in this competence model really soon. Before that, we just wanted to kind of highlight 2 things, each of me and Kyle each, that we think this competence model, why it's interesting. So I'm going to speak from kind of my role as a practitioner, where I think for me, it's both kind of an ideal to strive towards. It's also an interesting kind of lens to put over my team, not just the team that's doing a specific assembly, but also kind of within We Do Democracy, do we have people who are excelling at kind of different parts of this competence model that I know I can then call when kind of the knowledge curation is difficult to do? And then it's also just a really interesting kind of point of reference for seeking new knowledge and building my own skills, and also really kind of exploring these where the cultural or the practice differences that are not about quality, but that's about how we do it. That was it for me.
Nice, thanks, Clara. I hope people can kind of see that this has been fun. I think it's been really kind of like intellectually quite interesting to kind of go deep with people like Clara into how to carve these responsibilities up, like which ones are necessary and which ones are nice to have, and kind of building out this framework. I'm really interested to see where people kind of disagree and agree and push back on certain pieces. And I think the challenge that is most interesting here is to sort of figure out how we sort of measure or like determine success across these different competences between facilitation styles that are quite different, or cultural contexts that are quite different. So there's I think a lot of maturity still to achieve in how we think about and talk about these kinds of competencies in this sort of challenge. But I wanted to just now sort of distinguish or at least point out the difference that we're making between sort of like this concept of lead deliberative facilitator and maybe like a regular deliberative facilitator. And I think one thing I want to emphasize is that we're not really using this to describe just like very good. It's not sort of like seniority or level of experience or something like that. I think the lead facilitator is sort of responsible for the conditions under which sort of good deliberation can happen, and sort of judging for how those conditions need to be protected or adapted or changed in any kind of way. And so I think you can make this distinction across a few different dimensions, and I just wanted to highlight 3 here and then wrap them all up. I think in terms of scope, the lead facilitator manages the process end to end, which is not just that they know how to facilitate well, but they understand sort of why the process has this shape and for what level of impact. And so this is mostly around sort of like the whole bucket of end to end. How do we make this assembly achieve something in the world? They have this responsibility or sort of like accountability, which is that they have the operational responsibility, which is deliver the project. But they also are sort of normatively in some way responsible for like the democratic quality of the process. And I think this is almost like an extra layer of responsibility where a deliberative process is takes on a level of responsibility that is not just delivering for the client or for the government. And that's like an extra weight that I think the lead facilitator holds. And then there's this question around like adaptation and judgment. A lead facilitator can make principled adaptations because they understand the sort of design logic and trade-offs between not just the process flow, but how it influences those other 2 things, sort of the impact and responsibility of the process to deliver for the community. And I think you can wrap all these up and sort of say that they track various sort of layers. The lead facilitator tracks various layers sort of all at once, and that lets them make micro interventions for this sort of macro kind of purpose, weaving things like the quality of the process, inclusiveness, coherence, purpose, and impact, and those kinds of features. And I think this is a complicated package that requires all of the sort of competences that we've described, and isn't just this person is very good. And I'm looking forward to people disagreeing with that framing. I will now hand back to Zakia.
Thank you, both of you. That was a packed race through kind of work we've been doing for over a year. I'm just going to say actually not a lot, but just a few things about our first drafted training program, where we will host first version of that or at least in this context, based on this competence model in September. And so just one thing before I do that, when I started facilitating deliberative democracy, I had plus 20 years of experience of design and facilitation of all kinds of stuff. And in the beginning, I was like, oh, this deliberative facilitation is completely new. And I felt very naked. And I thought, I'm going to step into this and I can't use any of the old stuff I knew. And then working with it, I realized quite a lot of what we do in deliberative facilitation is based very much on just very good facilitation, also leaning on other contexts. But there are also some things that are very different. So I think this is also about carving out what is standing kind of on the shoulders of a broader facilitation skills, and what is adding on and making it deliberative democracy. So it's this drafted version of this. We have tried to do something that is both ensuring knowledge, capabilities, and actually motivating doing. So it's not just a training program that's theory. It's also very much embodied learning, and making sure when you leave the room you are going to be able to, or at least be much more capable of actually feeling safe and secure in running an assembly. We will there will be 2 levels of this, maybe even 3, but one of the training programs will be for lead facilitators that either have experience as lead facilitators, are commissioned to run an assembly, and have facilitation competences already. So there will be a lead facilitator training program, the people that people will call when they need someone to run a national assembly or something big and complicated. And then there will be a training program for just as important people, but just with a little less experience in some of these dimensions. So there's going to be some different levels of training programs, but it's the same competence model. It's just kind of sizing some of the material a bit different. So the lead facilitator program for people with experience, facilitation experience, and either assignment as lead facilitators or experiences. So this is what I'm drafted here. So it's going to be a learning flow where there's going to be some onboarding with introduction to the program and setting learning goals, etc. There's going to be some homework done, and then there's going to be a three-day training program in Copenhagen. I'm going to show you the dates in a second. It's going to be a bit more homework on your own cases, on your own processes, and some online learning calls where we do group follow-up and look at what kind of problems and issues and questions pops up on the basis of both the training but also the casework. And then there's going to be a possibility of booking extra consulting for specific processes, mentoring, observing assemblies, etc. But we're going to come back with that. So if we look at the drafted 3-day program, and I promise you I'm not going to go through all of it, but just to show you, for those of you who know facilitation, will, I hope, recognize parts of this. And the trainers will be trained deliberative facilitators, some of those in this room, but also with extra rock stars joining us for parts of the program. So we will be working with placing deliberative facilitation in the field of facilitation. How does it differ? Where is it the same as everything else? We will be defining and deep diving design and facilitation in this context. What is a lead facilitator role? We've already heard some of the competence model descriptions, but we're going to be diving deeper into that. We're going to be working with macro design, both stages and different activities. And then we're going to be running small laboratories throughout all 3 days where the participants will be working on their own assembly cases. On day 2, we will work with knowledge curation, how to do that. We will guide the participants to build and qualify their own macro designs, and then micro design, basic design and guidelines for how to actually build a day program or a weekend program in the different parts of a mini public. We're going to be showcasing a gallery with different micro design elements, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot back because we're just sampling in what we find, and I'm sure that the stack is going to be big when we get people into the room. Then we're going to do more laboratory work on your own cases, and then we're going to do some democracy fitness training, which is a democratic training program that suits very well the deliberative field. And you're going to be invited for a tour at Democracy Garage in Copenhagen, the location. Then there's going to be on day 2, sorry, Miguel, just 1 second back, we're going to be kind of the day 1 and day 2 is very much in the design and preparation. Day 3 is basically where the music starts playing and people enter the room. So that will be leading dialogue, mediation dysfunctions, how to handle group dynamics, large-scale practices, and not least how to give you some extra shine, you as a deliberative facilitator. How can we help you be strong in that role? And yeah, that's the drafted model for that. And then the next one, Miguel, if you can help me with that. Yep. And we hope to be able to do this, make it very hands-on and helpful, exemplary. So what we do in the room is what we want you to do in the room. Interactive and fun. It's a great mistake that the adults don't learn when they have fun. We're going to try to strive for 30% listening, 50% doing, and 20% time to reflect and connect to your own context and your own cases. Use the basis of the experience for the deliberative field, and not least, also have a chance to talk about how we can empower each other and build the community around deliberative facilitation throughout Europe and the world. So we're going to have an onboarding session 1st of September. Training program will be from 14th to 16th of September in Copenhagen. Follow-up session in the end of September. And it's going to be at Democracy Garage. Some of you have been there, luckily. For those of you who haven't, it's an innovation center and meeting space for participatory democracy in Copenhagen, where we will be hosting the training. So I think that's me on the presentation, and the next step is it's the breakout rooms finally. So now we're gonna send you out to talk to each other about those D questions, which are conversation starters. Please pick the one that where you think, ooh, that's interesting. You don't have to go through all of them.
I very much hope that you all had a very good conversations in the breakout rooms and were able to discuss a bit the questions, how that competence model can maybe support all our work and what's lacking, but also what's something you would see for yourself. I'm very happy now to lead a conversation here in January, and I would like to introduce my panelists, and I'm very happy and fortunate to have a kind of really high professional round of colleagues together. I would like to introduce Kelly McBride, Director of Capacity Building and Standards in Involve UK. Kelly, great to have you. I would also like to introduce Susanna Novak, professional trainer, facilitator, and deliberation expert. Susanna, great to see you again and to have you in that discussion. And last but not least, Catherine Skar, the co-founder and partner of So Central from Norway. And I'm very happy to now, with you, look a bit into the competence model, what it is, why we have it, and where we should take it. And first question, Kelly, would be to you, because you have actually also been part of the development team of that competence model. So my question would be, why do you think it was a good idea, kind of in the first instance, to develop such a competence model?
Hey everyone from Edinburgh in Scotland. So yeah, I'm Kelly McBride. I work for a UK-based charity that works to make public participation, deliberation an everyday part of our democracy called Involve. And I led the facilitation of my first commissioned deliberative panel in 2016, but have a much longer and varied tale of facilitation experience beyond that. And I think there's been a really exciting evolution of interest in deliberative engagement and specific methods attached to that over recent years. And now and again, I'll get a message from a student or a young person asking how to break into this space. But equally, on the other side, I hear these questions coming from senior people in government who want to deepen their practice. And I think there's some real energy around these types of processes and how we facilitate them. But when people ask how to develop their experience, what I often find is that I don't have a place to point them to in terms of what is required of a role of a lead facilitator in these processes. And I found that a lot of the opportunities, the training, the support, the guidance out there is mostly clustered around various other roles like small group facilitation and moderation and logistical support. And they're really valuable and important and integral roles in the process. But if something is a black box, which is the terminology we've used, you can't really see under the hood and see what's part of that role, then how do you develop towards it? And I think what this competence framework does is start to open that box a little bit. And if I think about something like a citizens' assembly, there's just so much that happens before anyone sets foot in a room. There's months of design work and navigating relationships and remit development and budget decisions and governance stuff. And that backstage work, I think, can be a little bit invisible sometimes without developing a shared understanding of what it involves. So yeah, really great to see this, I think, develop on that basis. And it's much needed. And I think, it's timely and it's important to enable the field to scale with quality, and it gives us a little bit of a compass to work with. And when you set out all of the components that are in it, at first it might look like quite a lot, but it also gives people a chance to say, hey, I can help there. And for me personally, if I think of what that means, it's been brilliant to work with people that have honed crafts around specific elements within this, like learning designers and content designers for knowledge curation and translating complex info. But as a lead, you do have to kind of be across all of it to some extent, but it also allows that room as well for other people to jump in.
Thanks very much, Kelly. So if I summarize that correctly, you would say first thing is actually it doesn't exist yet, and we desperately need it because like the deliberative wave is going on, and everyone is looking for like, where do I find actually the full scope model of what do I need to do if I lead an assembly? And you just described it nicely, how many tasks and kind of obligations lie within that leading a citizens assembly. And so that's maybe the moment now to introduce the model. Susa, we actually met, I think, almost 5 years ago in the European Parliament when we did the very first European Citizens Panel, and you've been part of the... Don't tell me,
because time really flies. It's crazy.
Time flies, that's true.
So long.
But it's good to see you and to have you, and you're really kind of an expert facilitator and have a long experience with that. You haven't been part of developing the model, so my question is now that you look into the model, how do you think can it be useful?
Yes, I am the fresh set of eyes. Also, there are so many big names in the room. I feel very small, but the truth is that I have facilitated many of these processes. I've co-designed some deliberative processes, but also what I mostly do now and have done for the last decade is I teach. I teach in a very non-teacher way, but the majority of my work actually has not been facilitation. It's been running trainings. And when I saw this competence model, I'm going to share my first impressions. First thing I thought was, how idealistic. And then I realized this is what people have been telling me every time I talked about what I do and every time I described citizens assemblies to people from outside the field. They always said that, oh, maybe in the perfect world, but it's too idealistic. And I always said that, somebody has to hold that vision. And then, so I caught myself doing the same thing about this model. So I had a very big aha moment there. And then I also thought, it says that it's a competence model of a lead facilitator. And I was like, you mean an elite facilitator? Because there is no person in the world that can embody all of this at once. But I do think that it is a great list to evaluate yourself as a team of coordinators or just people who are running citizens assemblies, and to actually sit down with your team around the table and check honestly who's got, just to make sure that all the bases are covered, right? So who's the best at which of these points, because you don't, none of us are truly a jack of all trades. That doesn't happen. And so another thing that came to mind was very similar to what Clara said earlier, all of those uses, I think. But in designing a training for facilitators, your navigation system cannot plot a route for you if you don't put in a destination. And I feel like this list of competencies, even though it's quite exhaustive, is a great sort of outline of a destination that you want to get to when you're designing the training. So if you're designing a training for people who are actually meant to do this job, you need to check in with yourself whether the exercises you've designed and the learning sessions you've designed, including the reflection spaces, the writing prompts, all of that, how are they helping those people become what is on that in that competence model? How are you leading them towards that? And I think that's a very useful tool in that. It's almost overwhelmingly comprehensive, so good job to those who are actually putting it into words. And there are a lot of things on there that I was waiting for somebody to put into words. There's also some things that are not on there that are impossible to put into words, because there is a segment of facilitation competence that is so soft, when how we talk about soft skills, that is so soft you actually cannot even sort of put a finger on it and describe it into words. And when you try to describe it into words, people roll their eyes because you say something like, oh, you have good energy, or you like people, but they're essential. They're actually essential things. If you're a good facilitator, you need to like people, even though that sounds sort of silly. So yeah, those are my impressions. And thank you also for bringing me onto the call, because it's been very enlightening so far.
Thanks very much, Susa. Yeah, thank you. That's very funny what you said, because actually when we sat in a room first time together, like Zakia, Eve, Clara, Kyle, myself, and in Brussels half a year ago, actually I think we started designing a training, and we realized actually it needs a competence model in order to design a training. So what you just described is exactly the way we also kind of went through, and realizing now that the competence model really helps us kind of making sure we do a proper training. And so yeah, that's actually where it comes from. Introducing Catherine, you actually are very busy introducing citizens' assemblies to Norway, and you already, I think, ran 2 national citizens' assemblies by now. So I would like to know from you kind of who is that competence model for, and also the trainings. What do you think? How can it be, or for who can it be helpful actually?
Well, yeah, first of all, I'm just really impressed by what you've done, because you managed to put into words something that's, as you already said, difficult to describe. And we were so lucky to collaborate with We Do Democracy in those 2 national citizen assemblies, and it was really important for us to get good training in that lead facilitation role as well. And I, reading through it and also thinking back to when we first started in So Central, doing citizen assemblies or mini publics and panels, the method resonated really well with us because we had been for many years working with collaborating with partners in complex challenges. And so besides for the obvious participants in this training, I think also actors that are working with creating partnerships around complex challenges would really benefit from this training as well. So whether small like coalitions or where we have that overarching mandate or vision, I think that would be a really, really good training for people going into that space.
Thank you very much, Catherine. So everyone who's kind of busy entering the space and also building partnerships to develop citizens assemblies and other deliberative projects together should kind of take part in such trainings. And great. You already kind of Zuza said it a bit that no one is kind of the one who's doing it all and who's knowing it all. So there definitely are areas where maybe also the four of us lack a bit of things. And when we did the briefing on Monday, I asked you to maybe also think about what is something where you would say that's something I still need to improve, want to learn better. And maybe Kelly, looking at you, what is your kind of skill which you would like to further improve?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. I'm looking out and I can see some hills on a sunny day in Scotland, and I always have this thing that is like a similarity to being out in the hills, because like you study a map and you know the terrain and you plan the route, but once you're out there, the weather shifts, the path looks different to how it is on paper, and you have to kind of read the landscape in real time, and the destination belongs to the group. So you're always having to be uncomfortable with some level of certainty, but going out there prepared. And yeah, that is a real challenge. And I think the honest answer is that you have to hold a lot. But I would, if I had to hone in on one section within the framework, to be honest, it would actually be around project delivery. Because I think the model, it captures individual competences really well, but what it can't fully reflect is the reality of work that sometimes for many of us in this space is funded in such a way where lead facilitators are perhaps running a few processes simultaneously, context switching and having to be completely present for everything. Within an environment where, because of social, political, personal reasons, things are shifting. So sometimes that is a challenge. That is absolutely a challenge that you have to hold, and it's not always an easy one. So yeah, having a good team around you is integral in these things, really. But that for me is the one that is a constant reflective struggle.
Thank you, Kelly. I couldn't kind of emphasize that more. I think that's really the difficulty of the lead facilitator is kind of that being kind of very certain and clear in parts, because you also need to give security to the whole assembly and also to the team if you're the lead facilitator. So you need to be very clear on things, while at the same time we all know, and that's also the benefit of citizens assemblies, that you need to be flexible and open and see how it develops and where it develops, and to bring those two worlds together. That definitely can sometimes be challenging, but actually that's, at least for me, also the part I love about it, is to have that flexibility and to know actually we learn together and we do it together and we go step by step. And but I think it's like, when I think about it, it's but that's rather now on the competencies. It's a lot about having the right attitude, and it's nicely put in that phrase. You need to really believe in the skills of everyone who's in the room, and that everyone can participate and be very open about that, while at the same time being clear, as I said, and be kind of also being able to be strict and give guidance. And so that's the two dimensions. But I want to hear from Catherine and Zuza. Catherine, what would you say is something you would kind of still want to improve? Catherine, you're still on mute, so maybe you would unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry. Well, I think that would be on the project delivery part, because I'm really happy to be in that space where things are changing and you have to switch things around, and so communicating together with that whole project team, being clear as to why you're doing it, and holding on to that process, but really doing it with the respect for those in your team that are really into the project going forward. It's a delicate balance, because you're a team with a lot of different competencies. So building that understanding from the beginning on like when you're designing the process, the design of the process is just a tool for you to evaluate along the way what you need to change and where you're going next. And really taking your time to give it that understanding and the importance of that role to the whole project team. That's something I need to improve on. And I think it's an important part of building that culture within everyone that's involved in the process.
Thank you, Catherine. Zuza, how about you?
Oh my gosh, I love the part when I'm in the room with the participants, and I even love the spontaneous aspect of it and having to adapt to different circumstances in the course of the conversation. No problem there, but I will tell you that there are things I suck at, and one of those is timekeeping and note-taking, because I love the part that you like sit down with people and look them in the eyes. And I love that, the presence aspect and sort of holding the room and holding space, almost being a good host as well. Great, something that I feel very strong at. But when you start to put in additional things to keep track of, like time and note-taking, and also often staying in touch with the rest of the team, like being on Slack or any other kind of external communication, my brain goes into overload. So if there's something that I can really work on, is timekeeping in a way that doesn't make me distracted from what's happening, from the magic that's happening between the people. And I have not yet found, it's not, I find, a problem that can be solved with money. And I know because I've tried, I've bought every watch and timekeeping device that I could, but nothing has so far helped me. So I feel like it must be a personal struggle that is, you know, my mission in life to get better at.
Thanks, Zuza. I have to admit, I also often have a too relaxed relationship with timekeeping. And also what I'm really bad with is cutting people off. You know, sometimes you have those people who would take ages and ages and ages. And I'm really struggling, even if everyone knows now it's really the time to make that person stop talking. I'm really struggling with that. That's something I definitely want to learn more about. But also knowing that, you know, that's part of the role and you need to do it. And so sometimes it's the moment where you simply cut off someone. I want to make sure we also have time for everyone to speak and for a Q&A session. But before we conclude that conversation, I would have a last question. And that would be, now we talked a bit of what we kind of personally are lacking a bit and what we might want to improve personally. But also when you read the competence model, what is something that stood out to you, what you maybe wouldn't have expected in such a competence model, some feature or some competency where you say, oh, okay, that's interesting, but makes sense, or maybe not. And this time, maybe Zuza, I'll start with you. And Zuza, you're
sorry, somebody tagged me in the chat, so can you just repeat the question? Because again, the distraction thing.
Question would be, if you look into the competence model, is there something that stood out to you where you would say, oh, I wouldn't have expected that in this competence model, or that was a surprise to you that is in there?
A positive surprise for me was the entire foundations section. I think that it's great that somebody finally said it and put it in writing and treats it as a non-negotiable expectation. This is very much, I feel like when I was reading it, I was like, my people, you know, so that was a good sort of thing to start off with, because it's right at the beginning. So I was like, oh, yes. So let me then read the rest. I was already sort of positive about the whole rest of the document. Another thing, of course, that stands out as sort of from sort of this bird's eye view at this is that it's a lot. It's a very long list. So on one hand, very well done for being so articulate and so comprehensive. On the other hand, good luck finding a team who can actually cover all of these bases. But if we treat it as an ideal to strive towards, that's a completely fine tool. I also think it's a great tool for self-evaluation, because I was reading it and I was already doing it in my head, like sort of trying to be very self-critical and self-aware about which one of these points are my strong suits and which are not, and which I can improve on, which is exactly what you asked earlier. So I think one thing which is already said is that you sort of go through that list with your team, but also have some quality time with yourself to look at that list. And I think that's also very, very useful, which makes me happy that you included a lot of reflection time in your design for the facilitation training, because I think that's a great teaching tool that is very underutilized.
Thanks, Susa. And actually, we already have a similar question in the chat from Caro. How can you maybe also share the responsibilities, and how can also a co-lead facilitation look like? We'll touch upon that later. Kelly, what stood out to you?
Hello. I mean, first of all, hard relates to pretty much everything that's been said so far. But I'm also going to be a bit repetitive here, because the inclusion of that foundations for me as a distinct section rather than just a footnote, like, is great. It makes values explicit in a framework, and sometimes that's unusual. But I think it is essential for this kind of work, because, you know, one of the things in there, thinking about like the people in the process, if you don't fundamentally believe the people you're working with are capable of making it and doing this process, then you've got a real problem. So having that as a starting foundation feels really, really important, that belief in the capabilities of ordinary people, because outside of the room, the reality is you as a lead facilitator are still, even though you've been commissioned, the process is getting going, are constantly making the case for the process and defending all sorts of decisions along the way. And I think another thing, like, you know, that's quite hard to put into words, but which the model captures more implicitly, is that comfort with uncertainty that also feeds into this. Because I think if you don't hold both, that like really strong belief in the capability of folk who are amazing with that comfort with uncertainty, then a process can collapse the moment it gets uncomfortable, because tools and templates and training programs and all of that can capture a lot and can help you a lot. But there's something else under all of this that's really, really important. So yeah, for me, it was brilliant to see it, like, you know, actually make it in there into the final version. And, you know, just lastly, just like reflecting on how much is in there, because of course I think when you instinctively look at it, you're like, whoa, that's a lot. But if you think that about, you know, national citizens assemblies through to local processes, through to pan-European processes, elements in here are going to speak differently to different levels, or where processes are perhaps more emergent, or where you're balancing quite broad and specific remits. So yeah, hopefully we can all lean into the spirit of that. But reading it, it's like, oh, at some point I have had to grapple with most of those things, if not all of them. So yeah.
Thanks, Kelly, and thanks for also touching upon the different levels and how maybe you sometimes need to be adaptive. At the same time, the competence model really covering it all. Catherine, you have the concluding words for this conversation. What stood out to you?
Well, I totally agree on the foundation sections. That I was just so happy to see that. And for me, especially, I think it's number 2, that the integrity of the outcome matters more than a tidy resolution or speed or everything, because that's about priority, and that priority goes through the whole process. So I was just really happy to see that there. And also I think the whole model, even if it's extensive, it just really shows that this kind of facilitation is not a neutral technique. It's like an ethical practice, and I really think that comes through in this competence model. So I'm just really happy to see that.
Amazing, thank you. And that's the moment to thank the 3 of you for that kind of very good conversation and going deeper into the competence model and how we can make use of it. So thanks Susa, thanks Kelly, and thanks Catherine. And that is now the moment to also open the floor for your questions and also your thoughts from the broader audience, I'd say. So I'm happy to see Clara, Kyle, and Zakia on the screen again, and they are ready for your questions and also commenting on what has been said. I think the conversation just now can be a very good approval, Clara, Kyle, for that very well done competence model. But obviously now we're really open to hear more questions, and if you want to take the floor, you're free to raise your hand and I will give you the floor. Obviously you can also use the Q&A section and we'll take the questions from there. Is there anyone who would like to take the floor with some questions, comments on the competence model or on the training program as well? as long as everyone's still thinking about it, we might take that question from the chat, and then we'll also give the floor to Brooke. But the question from the chat, which Caroline Piras kind of mentioned, is, and that would maybe be a question for Zakia, for you as an experienced lead facilitator, the question of co-lead facilitation. So because the competence model is really broad and maybe not one person can cover it all, what do you think? How good can such roles also be shared and not be on one person solely? And maybe that's something you can come in on, Zakia.
Yeah, and thank you for a very good question. Definitely, there should be a co-lead. I actually think our experience is very much in the WeDo team that leading such a thing on your own is impossible. I mean, and I'm not only talking about the project team. I'm also talking about someone who's standing right next to you and give you key cue cards and the stuff you forget, and whose eyes you can find and say, so what did I forget, and who can helpfully interrupt when you stuff like that. So being at least two in leading an assembly, I think is super key. And so yes, there is not only a role for a co-lead, there's a need for a co-lead, and for us at least, it's also a way of training in kind of mentor training new trainers. So Clara has been with me on her first mini public facilitation, and then her role just has been growing, and now she's taking over the floor. But it's also a way of looping someone in and training them while practicing the facilitation room. So it's also in that sense a very good way of broadening up bringing new colleagues to the table. So I do think in our kind of training program we're going to launch after this webinar in some weeks, we will search to design a training program for lead facilitators that already are lead facilitators and kind of have the full scale role, and then also a version for kind of more on the way facilitators that have been supporting lead facilitators doing minor parts of the program or who still need to learn on that level, because that role is extremely important.
Thank you, Zakia.
Yeah.
And I would give the floor to Brooke now.
I am just wondering, Catherine's comment around facilitation as an ethical practice. So I'm a member of the International Association of Public Participation, which has a code of ethics, and I'm wondering if there's a thought about developing something similar.
I think the short answer is yes. And I think we are still also kind of both being very inspired by the work done by other kind of bigger groups of kind of skilled and professional facilitators throughout the world. I do think we are still kind of drafting and baby stepping a bit. We have tried to formulate our first foundation principle, but I do think at some point it will be very relevant to build a kind of a more ethical foundation for this world work. I just very much want a bit more people into the room before we start doing so, because this is also about opening up kind of the conversation with colleagues that are from a broader, from other countries and from other contexts, because what seems very important to me might not necessarily be important to someone else. So yes, and hopefully you'll join us qualifying that.
Thank you, Zakia. I still would invite everyone to take the floor, and if you have questions or comments, feel free to raise your hand. While you think about that, I would look into Rob's question in the chat. He's asking, and that's maybe a question for Kyle and Clara, he's asking about measuring aspect of deliberative democracy and why that kind of also evaluation part of deliberative democracy and assemblies is not part of the competence model. Have you thought about that, Clara or Kyle, and what is your answer to that?
I can go if you want, Clara, first. I loved this question, Rob, and it's like something that I've been thinking about a lot. And I think there's maybe this fits in some sort of meta category, which is like, how do you get to these upper rungs, and how do you check whether or not you're succeeding? And is that essential to being able to get there? So maybe it needs to be included as like a category or something. I think there's some thinking around, these are the skills you need to do this role, but what other skills do you need in order to kind of like make that progression? But I think this question also pokes at a little bit of a problem that I'm spending lots of time thinking about at the moment, which is we have this challenge not just for lead facilitators, but we have this challenge for like the whole process in general, which is how do we really empirically measure how our little micro elements of a process are contributing to the success of the overall picture. And maybe like a tiny plug, which is that I'm actively working on this problem right now. So I will email you, Rob, but if anyone else is thinking about this, then feel free to reach out.
Yeah, so if I can just add a little bit, I think there's kind of the part of measuring the impact of deliberation, at least going into kind of the impact of the recommendations. I'm not really sure that's necessary for the facilitator. So there's part of kind of the impact and quality measurement that is not necessary for the facilitator. But I think we do have something in the competence model on kind of giving feedback and receiving feedback. And I think being able to give good feedback also means that you have to be able to look at your own processes, because if you can't attune your eyes to kind of what other people are doing, you also can't see what you yourself are doing, and vice versa. But I will kind of think about whether we need, in the danger of making this very long list even longer, needs one skill set in kind of critically assessing your own work. But as Kyle also mentioned, I think this is kind of necessary for being able to even learn this stuff in the first place, right? Yeah, I think that's the best answer I can provide.
Good for now.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree, and would also see that rather as a foundation, not in the whole evaluation, but in the kind of self-reflecting your work and kind of improving all the time. Rosa, you have your hand up, so the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Well, to begin with, thank you so much for a wonderful, wonderful presentation, and participatory opportunity too. The small groups were great. So my question has to do with, at the risk of expanding this already very thorough level of skill set, I love that you're including the preparation and the follow-up, and there's a realm of follow-up that I know people have started to work on now, which is the follow-up in terms of following up with the participants of the deliberative councils, and specifically with following up with capacity building, because usually participants are very much wanting to continue having these kinds of conversations. And so it seems to me that this would be a wonderful opportunity to increase the capacity for lay facilitation skills in the community at large, which seems to me to be an essential element for strengthening democracy beyond the mini publics themselves. So I would just love to hear you comment on that.
Cool. Zakia, Clara, I can see you.
Yeah, and then you could, and then maybe we can add something as well on that, Jakob, because I do think what we all probably experience is that kind of mini publics and assemblies are just a learning room that's just boosting people, boosting connections, boosting the motivation to participate and take responsibility of society at large. And that's kind of, I think that's very much the fuel I'm driving on, that feeling that this is much more than what's happening in the room. But at the same time, I also think we have to protect the facilitator in the room role, because this is not a change maker role. It's not a community organizer role. It's designing and running a process that has a stop and a start. And if there is then a possibility for you to continue supporting the work afterwards in a community organizer role or in an organizational change maker role, we always thrive to do so. But I do think also just in order to, where does my responsibility start and stop? Also just protecting people on my team. So kind of where does this also end? Because otherwise it's a long life responsibility. If we have been running more than 30 assemblies by now, it's a lot of group of people in many contexts that we then have a lifelong responsibility for. And I don't think we can't do that. So on a personal level, that's why I'm here. But on a kind of professional, also leading a team of deliberative lead facilitators, I try to protect them with a start and stop point of the assembly work we do. I don't know if that makes sense.
Can I add one? Yeah. I think beyond kind of the role of the facilitator, I think there's also something which we are still kind of in the field struggling with, which is the role of the citizen assembly, or kind of the mini public in the citizen assembly form that is commissioned by a public authority, which is, I think that it's really good for some things, but I think if we want to kind of mass build competences for democracy, I think we need to do other things that have deliberative elements, but that engage more people and bring more facilitation skills to more people, which I think, there's some really cool people in the UK and in Germany doing. Yeah.
Susa.
Thanks, Clara. Exactly. Susa, maybe with a brief reaction on that as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly mention that in the model that we were using, my team and myself, we did include participant training. So a skills training for the assembly participants, which included elements of facilitation to empower them also to self-facilitate some group discussions. The problem with that, though, even though I think it's a must-have, and like my position now is that it's a must-have for all deliberative processes, we often struggle with limited time and money resources. So that's always, and it's so frustrating because it's always a balance of how much we can do with what we have. So I think a skills training for the participants, which includes skills that are transferable, that they can carry over to other fields of their personal lives and work after the assembly ends, that's fantastic. And it's also a beautiful process to witness, and it's great, and it helps manage their expectations and prepare them for what's to come, and it has so many great outcomes. But for so many processes, it's just not feasible within the time limit and the budget, which I'm sad about. So let's funnel more money into deliberative democracy is what I'm saying, basically.
I see Rosa has really sparked a very kind of engaged debate. I can see Catherine also raising her hand, and Kelly, I have the feeling you also want to take the floor. I would need to ask you to really very brief answers, because I also want to touch on Hannah's question briefly, and we would like to finish on time. So Catherine, a very brief reaction also from your side.
Well, just a quick reflection on that question, because I think what we all experience running citizen assemblies is that a learning occurs in the participants in also how to talk to each other and treat each other. And maybe something we can be more aware of is giving that a language for them, so they can be more aware of what they have learned, like in the process of talking to each other. And that can be something that they can take with them more, like, yeah, on an awareness level.
Catherine and Kelly, do you also want to come in?
Yeah, I'll try and be brief. This is one of my favorite things to talk about at the minute. But I think it is the role of a lead facilitator to absolutely, at the very start of your engagement, ask a simple question, which is what happens next? And to start to understand the different routes to impact, by which I mean how we're going to deliver on whatever emerges from the process that you're holding. And then along the way, how you're building buy-in and relationships, maybe out there in and with community, but really importantly, among the people that need to deliver whatever's going to emerge from this thing, knowing that you're not going to be sure at the start who that's going to be, and develop relationships and trust along the way. And all of that is really connected to that question, as much as the ability to maybe support the development of facilitation capacity locally, which we are starting to see happen in some places. But then there's also the question about, like, at the end, are we really the best people to then hold those ongoing relationships and things, or are we maybe supporting other anchor institutions, people that are rooted in community, to deliver on what comes next?
Thanks very much, Kelly. I think my answer would have been very similar to what you just said. That I really like what you have said. Okay, we have 1 minute left, and I would kind of pose a little challenge, Zakia. Maybe you want to, when closing our webinar, also touch upon the question from Hannah, which is the question of handling of information. Obviously, in all the assemblies we do, we always have a topic, and the question is, how much do you need to be an expert on the topic, and how much not, because you're the facilitator. But having given that question to you, I would also take the moment to thank everyone for being here, and Clara and Kyle for really writing that competence model so nicely. Thanks to FIDE and We Do Democracy and everyone, for bringing it up, and looking forward to all next steps. And Zakia, over to you.
I think you need to, with a Danish phrasing, we would call it to be expert enough. I mean, you need to be able to facilitate and curate good questions and be able to kind of navigate really nutcases from good stuff, and you need to be able to facilitate that the right knowledge gets into the process. But I do think being too much of an expert is not good, because then you are not checking in with your experts, and you don't have arm's length distance to the material. So enough knowledge and enough expertise to be able to navigate, but not be an expert and therefore judging stuff in and out would be my short answer. And then to the what happens next, back to Kelly's lovely phrase. So we are going to send a presentation to everyone on the mailing list. With there's also going to be a survey where we're going to ask you for input on the competence model, what you love and what you would throw out and what you would add. And please help us there. Be loving, please, but be also very constructive and direct here, because we would very much want to build something that's relevant. Then within 2 weeks, we're going to send a possibility of signing up for interest for the training program from September. And with that, also a questionnaire where we're trying to navigate the different levels of needed training. So we make sure that those who want training get the right training for what you need. You already know the dates. That's also going to be in the presentation. And with that mail we're sending out, there's also going to be the price on the training. And one last thing, we've been asked whether this is going to be there's going to be a certification on that. Not yet. We will probably at some point, but I do think we need to develop something that's rather solid before we dive into more formalized versions of this. But for now, we're going to test it out, and we hope we're going to have a wonderful group of people in Copenhagen to help us out, make that hit the road. So I think that's for us as now. Lovely spring day in Copenhagen, and I hope you are all also going to have a nice day from now.